and welcome to this edition of Trader Talk TV. We're again coming virtually because of COVID, and hopefully the cure is coming. We're going to see the back end of this, and we'll be able to do whiteboard sessions in the office soon. But this is going to be a really good episode because again we're addressing one of the biggest issues in our industry, which is around the ID and privacy, and we're going to have a whiteboard session around that specific topic with Christian Carlson, who's the Global Solutions Architect at LiveRamp. Christian, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
And this is going to be a good episode because we are looking at solutions that are going to address this new privacy-first world. And as I said in the intro, we're in the middle of it now. We've had an announcement from Google about the deprecation of third-party cookies. And we have had other platforms and browsers who have deprecated their own ID to develop a privacy-first environment. And we need to look at solutions that are post-cookie, and this is one of them. So, Christian, before we go into the whiteboard, just give us a little bit of an overview of what because LiveRamp, is an intricate player in the ecosystem, but maybe for some of the viewers who don't know about LiveRamp, which they should. And after this, they will. But give us just a quick synopsis of what the company is and what they do.
Yeah, sure thing. So I think LiveRamp is probably most well known for being a data onboarding service. So for kind of the last 7 or 8 years, something like that, we've been really helping our clients make the best of their own data. So their existing CRM data and helping them not only onboard that data into an online environment, but also measure success off the back of campaigns that you run from that. That's really where LiveRamp started. It's probably what we're still the best known for today. But as that product kind of developed, as the industry developed, and now, of course, with third-party cookies going away, we realized that actually the technology that powers our onboarding service can actually be really, really powerful for first-party data, not just from brands, but actually also from publishers. And with the entire industry moving towards this kind of more first-party data first ecosystem, we realized that actually we have the potential to directly connect advertisers and publishers through their first-party data, and started working on what we're going to talk about today, which is the ATS solution and our kind of solution for the cookieless future.
Right. And for obviously our audience know what ATS is, the greatest show on earth, right? We have our own ATS brand, but that's okay. LiveRamp, you can get away with that one this week.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about the authenticated traffic solution, and it is based around the idea of a persistent ID which is encrypted, and we're going to go into details now. So let's run through that, Chris, because we've got our virtual whiteboard, and I'll be jumping in asking questions here. So I'll be asking from a buyer's perspective and a publisher's perspective. So Take it away, Christian. Let's start noodling on the whiteboard.
Fantastic. All right. So to start off with, let's look at a little bit of kind of background, both to LiveRamp and to the industry as a whole. So as we said, as I mentioned before, really what LiveRamp has been doing for a long time, we've really just been active kind of in this space. And really what we've been doing is helping brands take their existing CRM databases, which often were tied to things like email, to phone number, those kind of data points. And we used our identity graph and our people-based ID, the identity link, to convert their offline data into onlineable data. So basically converting emails into like a DSP cookie, for example. But then from there, from the DSP and the rest of the kind of programmatic journey, if you will, to actually serve and add to those people on the right publisher pages, LiveRamp had quite little to do with this, really. Now, this process, anything from kind of the DSP and forward in today's ecosystem, is very heavily reliant on cookies, and specifically third-party cookies. So if we continue this journey, a publisher has probably kind of collected their data, their audiences tied to their own cookie. They've aggregated that into an SSP where, again, that's tied to a different cookie. And then when the SSP and the DSP try to communicate to find, the right ad for the right person, again, they have to do some kind of translation, again, on a cookie before the ad can ultimately be served on the publisher site. Now, before the cookie was even going away, cookies did actually present quite a bit of a problem from a few different aspects. So first of all, because of all of these translations, there's significant drop-off happening at every step of the way. So you basically, the actual onboarding, you have some match rate there. Pushing data into the SSP, you'll have some drop-off there in terms of cookies not matching. The DSPs and the SSPs didn't have a perfect cookie match. And if you're really unlucky, there's not even a perfect match actually serving the ad through the ad server. So even before the cookie was going away, it was imperfect from an efficiency standpoint. Now, secondly, and probably the biggest reasons why cookies are going away is the privacy aspect of all this. So when you go onto a publisher and you have the CMP, or before CMPs, you had the cookie banner and you tried to say, yes, I give consent, that consent was very difficult to track because you've given consent to a specific cookie. That cookie represents your device. It doesn't represent you as a person. And every time you move it, as we've just explained, the actual cookie ID changes. So even if we had a persistent and good way of saying that exactly this cookie gave exactly this consent at this time, well, as soon as you move that data, you don't know yet. You don't know anymore who actually gave that consent, for example, or when they gave it. It's much harder to kind of keep track of that consent stream. So those are just like some of the problems. There's lots of other problems with the cookie that we could go into, but those to us have been the primary ones. So the privacy aspect of it and the efficiency of cookies.
So basically, obviously privacy is number one, because that the industry probably would have cobbled along if privacy hadn't been. But you're making a point that even then the efficiency of this is just we're losing probably money along the line, because cookies are matching disparate systems, disparate ecosystems where it doesn't sort of match either. So even if well, privacy is a big push about, but even if it hadn't arrived, you think that this would have been necessary anyway?
Yes, I believe so. And to be honest, like LiveRamp has actually been working on this problem, on the specific efficiency problem, for the last 5 years or so. So we started, for example, the Ad ID Consortium, where the whole idea of that was basically on the demand side, let's stop using cookies, start using identity link. On the publisher side or supply side, let's reduce the number of cookie spaces that you have to sync between to make marketing more efficient for everybody.
So, Christian, there are many people out in the ecosystem now pulling their hair out and crying into their afternoon tea about the collapse of this specific ecosystem, because it's kind of been the ecosystem we've been used to for the last 20 odd years. Let's talk about how you're solving this problem, right? How you're solving this for both the publisher, the ad tech ecosystem, and the marketer / agency buyer.
Absolutely. All right. So let me just clean this up very quickly. So as we said, basically anything today from the DSP forward is reliant on cookies, and the cookies are going away. So what LiveRamp are doing right now, and what we've been scaling basically since the beginning of this year and a little bit already even last year, is effectively replacing all of these different cookies and even other IDs like PII, whatever is being used in the current platform, replacing that with LiveRamp's identity link. Now, the identity link, as we mentioned before, has been kind of the glue that we've been using to connect the offline world of PII, such as emails and phone numbers, with the online world of cookies. And the IDL fundamentally is a people-based ID that is persistent over time. So it represents a person. It is fully deterministic. There's no level of probabilistic matching or fingerprinting or any such mumbo jumbo. It's all, unless we know that it's exactly this individual, we're not going to apply an identity link to it. Now, in doing this, by introducing IDL as the kind of common currency for the industry, we solve for a lot of different problems at once. So first of all, we mentioned previously that one of the problems with cookies was efficiency. Well, that immediately gets eradicated here because with the same ID across the board, there's no need to translate IDs when you move data around. So it's a much more efficient way of reaching the customers that you want to be reaching. So effectively, as long as a person exists in an advertiser's database and they have been seen on the publisher's site, you're effectively guaranteed a match. Now, the second thing, again, as we said, the IDL being a people-based ID actually means that sorry about that, actually means that we can unlock people-based revenue for publishers who use the identity link. Now, people-based revenues, like true people-based revenues, have basically been limited today to the likes of Facebook, to Twitter, to Google, like all the walled gardens where every impression is a logged in one. Well, because the identity link is based on that same kind of event, an actual authentication event, any publisher using IDL and any brand buying on IDL knows they're getting 100% people-based marketing. Now, the third thing, and again, the most important one, as we've talked about before, is how this affects privacy. The whole point really of making this change and why cookies are going away is because the privacy of the current ecosystem has not been good enough. So what we're doing to address this, there's a few different things. Now, the first thing, which comes back again to not just the efficiency but also the people-based nature of the IDL, is that any consent that is given at any point in time for the IDL's lifespan, since it's the same ID and it's persistent over time, regardless of where you use it, that same consent is very easy to track, regardless of where you're looking at that data. Compared, like we said before, to cookies where it constantly changes. So that's the first benefit, that it's much easier to track the consent that you have been given. But secondly, when we introduce IDL to the industry, we make sure, first of all, that any advertiser that we work with who wants to apply an identity link to their audiences, we have a very strict due diligence process to make sure that they have the right consent to apply an IDL in the first place. So basically, the entry point of data on the demand side, being the advertisers, has a consent barrier before any data enters it. The exact same thing is true on the publisher side. So we do not allow any publisher to apply an IDL to their inventory unless they have sufficient consent to do so. Now, we actually even go so far as to give out our own CMP, the LiveRamp Privacy Manager, which of course is a TCF2 IAB consent platform. We give that away for free to any publisher who doesn't currently have the correct kind of CMP in place to help them gather the right consent for their data. Now, because these are the only two entry points of data into the ecosystem, you know that you're covered on both sides. So nothing enters the demand side without consent, nothing enters the supply side without consent. So therefore, any data flowing through the entire ecosystem is not just consented, but it's actually consented twice. So you've opted into the advertiser for advertising, you've opted in on the publisher side to receive advertising, and that's the only data that flows through this ecosystem.
Would the CMP, just talking from the publisher point of view, would the CMP appear after the login? So would you require, like, because obviously this is all based around persistent IDs, right? And email is obviously the one persistent ID online now that hasn't been completely taken over by the GAFA. But you log in, would the CMP appear after the login so that you actually have that consent? Or where do you insist on that happening even without TCF framework, that you need to have that consent? You have to see it before you can let those IDs go into your ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. So it actually we have to see we need the CMP to be served before a user would ever have a chance to enter an email, so that they have had a chance to look at making sure that they have checked the right boxes in the CMP and that they actually have given the consent. But we actually go a little bit further than that to make sure that when a publisher signs up for ATS, they also have to explicitly call out in their privacy policies that they're working with LiveRamp, that LiveRamp is going to help the publisher create this IDL from their data, with also links to LiveRamp's opt-outs and all of that, so that it's very easy for a user, if they don't want to be part of this, they can very easily click like, okay, I don't want to be a part of this, I want to opt out.
Right.
Now, that actually brings up another really, really good point for the privacy aspect of this solution, which is actually the opt out for a user who doesn't want to be a part of this. Because where previously in a cookie world, if you opted out from a publisher, well, then you've opted out from that specific cookie, but then any other cookie is still fair game. And if you have 80 different cookies on your browser, if you want to actually opt out, well, that's a really fun weekend trying to read 80 different privacy policies and opting out of all of that. With this solution, from a customer perspective, if you don't want to be a part of this, you have one single opt out and an IDL cannot be attached to you ever again. So it's much simpler from a user perspective as well.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So there's a means to understand the opt-in and then understand how to opt out, and it's a one-click scenario, which is better than sort of like the current mess that we are in. So let's just jump into the mechanics of this, Christian, because it's quite interesting how you do this. So let's talk about how you get from a persistent ID and how it flows into your encrypted layer and how that works with the rest of the ecosystem.
Yeah, sure thing. So for this, we'll start first on the demand side, just because that's the simplest really of these. So how we get Identity Link onto the demand side, really, since, as we said before, what LiveRamp has been doing for a long time is converting kind of emails to an IDL and that converting that IDL into a DSP cookie. That's how we've been bridging the gap again between like offline and online data. Now, with cookies going away, we basically just cut out this last step. We just don't translate the IDL to a DSP cookie. Instead, we put a little extra encryption on the identity link. So we basically create a DSP unique version of the IDL, and we push that into the DSP. So very simply, we don't really have to change any of the pipes. We don't really have to change very much at all to introduce IDL to the DSPs. And the same is true for DMPs or basically any other platform on the demand side. Where kind of the real magic happens is on the publisher side. And this is where the actual authenticated traffic solution runs. So what we do here at a high level is we give a publisher the technology to create the IDLs themselves from their own traffic. And basically the way it works is, as we said before, the very first thing that happens is we check for consent. If no consent is given, our tech shuts down completely. However, if consent is given, the first thing that happens is that we detect some kind of email being entered on page. So this can be through a newsletter sign up, through a login event, through a paywall. You've read your 3 articles for the day, please enter your email to keep reading. Any such event can be detected or fed to the ATS script. That is then pseudonymized using a hashing algorithm and then pinged against a LiveRamp identity API. That API basically says, okay, I received this hashed email. So I'm going to look that up in the LiveRamp identity graph and find the corresponding IDL for that email. So the API then returns the identity link that corresponded to that hashed email. Now at this stage, there's 2 really important things that happen. The first is that the hashed email has now done its job. It has found the right IDL corresponding to it, so it is now permanently deleted. So LiveRamp does not retain any information whatsoever from the publisher. So that's the first thing. The second thing that happens is that similarly to how we said on the DSP that we actually push a DSP encrypted IDL into the DSP, we further encode the identity link into what we call an IDL envelope. The IDL envelope, for all intents and purposes, is just a publisher unique version of the IDL. And that's then returned to the publisher and stored in the publisher's first party storage medium. So if that's a first party cookie, if that's the local storage on the browser, it can even be done completely server side, where you just call the API from whatever infrastructure you have on the server side. That can be completely disconnected from the browser if the publisher has that kind of infrastructure. But regardless of how the publisher does this, what we've ended up with is IDL-based supply on the publisher side and IDL-based demand in the DSP. So the final step is to obviously connect those two. And that is where the SSP comes in. So the SSP has a little piece of tech called the sidecar. And basically all the sidecar does, you can think of the sidecar as a keeper of the keys. So the sidecar can take incoming IDL envelopes from the publisher, and in real time, they decode and re-encode that IDL to the DSP specific IDL. So now in the bid request coming into the DSP, they're actually receiving an IDL that they already know and recognize. They can perform the bidding process against their demand sources and serve the right ad to the right person on the right publisher.
So the IDL first party cookie on the publisher page, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does it interact then with the SSP? So is the SSP is the SSP effectively pushing that first party cookie then through the ecosystem? Is that how it's working or not?
So actually, the whatever header bidder is running on the publisher, so be that pre-bid, be it Index Exchange's wrapper, Rubicon, whatever, or Magnate now, I guess.
Magnate.
Though the actual script is able to look inside the first party cookie and pull out the envelope. So what's actually going into the bid request is the envelope itself.
So, but could just thinking about this, can browsers that are not happy about this block this, or would that end up blocking all the first party cookies effectively?
Yeah, exactly. That would end up blocking first party cookies, which
frankly nothing would work on the site basically. Sorry? So nothing would work on the site effectively. If you block first party cookies effectively, you're basically making the site completely unusable, should I say?
Exactly. Now, even if that were to happen, the IDL actually functions just as well on kind of a server to server style integration. So you could create the identity link envelope server side, which again is completely browser agnostic, and then you could basically call call the SSP server side and all of that. So even if very unlikely as it is, first party cookies were to go away as well, you can still run this server side. Okay.
So then that sort of is passed to the sidecar, which is just a name effectively, but you're looking for a specific first party or identifier, or what I would call an ID, but a first party format that then the SSP can basically pass that to the DSP effectively.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So what happens in that instance then as well? And the SSP, the DSP can see what, because they've got the identifier. Well, they've got the IDL from the advertiser, and the SSPs have the IDL from the publishers, and they're just basically doing their matching that way.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the kind of beauties of this is that there actually isn't any matching going on other than in the DSP, because since the SSP is actually just decrypting and re-encrypting the same ID, you still don't have any drop off of any kind because the underlying IDL is still exactly the same.
Right.
So the only time that there's any matching going on is in the DSP. And compared to kind of the cookie based ecosystem where you already know who you're going to target, you're just trying to get as many of those people back to the publisher. In this scenario, you end up with the same level of overlap as if the advertiser just said, here's all my emails, the publisher said, here's all my emails, let's just share them and target whoever overlaps. You get exactly the same overlap with the system, but obviously in a much, much more secure way than had the advertiser and publisher just decided to share their emails.
And this works then for targeting, but like, could you apply this to measurement as well? I mean, obviously with the cookie sort of like getting out of town, there is no sort of universal way to measure post view or anything else. So I'd be interested, because I've always been sort of mentioning this, I've mentioned it quite frequently, is that we have all the targeting we need to. What about good old fashioned measurement and actually deliver and telling the buyer that their ad spend worked?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very glad you asked, because one of the big parts about ATS and introducing IDL is actually exactly measurement. It's also been one of the things that LiveRamp has been helping our clients with for a long time, but with this ecosystem, it's become actually more powerful than ever. And the reason I say that is for a few different reasons. So first of all, the fact that you're using, again, the same ID across the board means that any kind of exposure logs or any like measurement sources of data will also be tied to the IDL. So let's take an example of, maybe you have the original audience that you target as a brand would originally be tied to PII. You'd have the exposure logs from the DSP of who saw the ads tied to a DSP cookie. You might have the actual click-through logs, either, if you're lucky, tied to a DSP cookie, if you're unlucky, tied to a third cookie. So that would be your click-through logs on yet another cookie. And then if you as a brand own your own sales channels, you could include things like purchase data of who actually came into store and bought it. If you don't own your own sales channel, so let's say you're Coca-Cola running a campaign, but you're Sainsbury's actually having the purchase data, well, even if that also was on PII, it's not accessible to the brand. So this was a huge problem, right? This is really difficult to run measurement off the back of this. But in this ecosystem, all of this is tied to the same ID. Again, all of this is tied to an IDL. And not only is that, of course, easier because it's the same ID, but also it's a people-based ID.
Yeah.
So you're not measuring the success of a certain cookie or how prevalent this device was to buy something. You're actually looking at how at return on investment, basically back on a person level when you run this kind of measurement.
Yeah.
And it's actually something that for all the DSPs and SSPs and basically all the tech partners who integrate with IDL, they have all kind of we have like a standardized exposure log template that they can provide. So it actually solves for like that kind of thing as well, where previously, even if you did get it on the same ID, you had lots of different structures to deal with. So it becomes a lot easier to run things like measurement.
Interesting. And so is that something you offer, or is it just a sort of a natural extension of your product, and in the terms of the users can say, well, I can use this for targeting, but I can also build an attribution model off the back of IDL?
Yep. So we can do both basically. We do have our own like in-house data science team where we can help advertisers or agencies or publishers, whoever wants to do it. We can help them run whatever kind of measurement they want. So that's kind of our, obviously that's like we take care of all the gathering of exposure logs. We do it all in our systems, and basically the end result is like a PDF of this is how your campaign went. However, if you're like much more sophisticated, you have your own data science team, all of this can be either pushed into your own existing environment, or we actually have our own environment called the LiveRamp Safe Haven. Safe Haven is basically like a self-serve platform where you can do anything from creating audiences to sharing your data, sharing first and second party data. Um,
I was gonna ask about Safe Haven because actually it's an interesting development product that you've
mhm.
got because this IDL extends to the logged in part of the web, right? The authenticated web, and
Yep.
as we all know, everybody's not going to log in for certain things. So you have a vast anonymous web. And I was just going to ask, that's a product that you have been building out to address that sort of blind spot, which is the anonymous web, which is the Safe Haven product. And it's very interesting. If this all fits together, then you're kind of building this huge addressable open web, effectively.
Exactly. And what's really interesting about that, because obviously everything LiveRamp do is authenticated at some point. However, just like you said, what is authenticated for one party may be completely anonymous for another. And that's exactly where the safe haven comes in. So if we go back to the example of someone who doesn't own their own sales channels, what the safe haven allows you to do is say, well, okay, I've defined my audience. So let's say over here you have your safe haven. So company A, they own all of these different sources. So they have the exposure logs, they have the click-through logs, and they have the audience. But what they don't have is the purchase data. But they can partner with someone in the safe haven. So let's say this is company B, and that company does have that purchase data, but they don't have access to the rest of the data. Well, within the safe haven, they can choose to share and basically just allow company A to get a slice of their data, to say, okay, I'm going to share with you all the purchase data of anyone who bought, for example, let's say soft drinks, and company A is Coca-Cola. Now suddenly Coca-Cola actually has the ability to go all the way down to sales purchase. And this data can be basically any type of data that you want. So if the data in the safe haven is based on PII, based on actual offline data, that can be done. If it's based on mobile data, if it's based on cookie-based data, until cookies go away, of course, that can be used as well. So it's really the safe haven, really, like you said, it unlocks what has been previously like unattainable or unknown data for certain brands, now makes that attainable through sharing of second party data.
Is this something? I mean, this is. I'm sure we would probably do another trader talk on the safe haven because it's quite the clean room stuff is quite interesting, particularly as it pertains to the anonymous web. But in terms of this IDL and the ATS product, does it work with all channels? Like, so obviously mobile's had a few issues of late with the deprecation of IDFA and other stuff. Could that be applied to that ecosystem as well? Is that possible to use in that sort of instance?
Yes, absolutely. So basically, because the IDL is fundamentally based in PII, any platform, basically anywhere where you would collect or use PII can use an IDL. So if that's mobile, if that's connected TV, if that's even our social platforms, like LiveRamp has we've connections directly with Facebook, with Twitter, with Spotify, all these guys, and all of them are powered by an IDL. We've even tested, obviously we're not going to start showing ads to people in Tesla cars, but technically, because you log into your Tesla vehicle, we can create an IDL for you there, and we can connect that to any demand source that you might have. So it really is a completely device agnostic ID because it's anchored in that kind of offline email based data or PII based data.
Yeah. And obviously, LiveRamp is not a media company. You do not take a proportion of the media at all. You're just basically an empowerment platform or a solution that helps you sort of unleash the value of your own logged in or persistent IDs that you might have. But it's a good question for publishers. Like, how important is this for them in terms of yield, like versus basically a blind impression, if you will, where there is no targeting and there is no measurement, particularly in a Safari or Mozilla environment where it is pretty, zero tolerance.
Yeah, I mean, we would say obviously that it's very, very important for publishers, and especially in kind of the world that we're headed, and the way that we see it, the current ecosystem has kind of become like we're trying to do people-based marketing with device-based technology. So what's happened is that basically any targeting that's happening is kind of in this like weird middle ground where we're trying to, make the cookie something that it actually isn't.
Yeah.
Whereas I guess the way we see it is that with this change, the obviously the abundance of cookies and the amount of data and traffic that is quote unquote authenticated may in pure volume terms go down. However, the first party data that you have as a publisher therefore becomes more important to make the most out of. And that's not to say that there's not going to be room for things like contextual and those kind of targeting purposes. Like that's absolutely going to explode when the third party cookie goes away. But that also means because that often fetches lower CPMs, it becomes much more important for the publishers to really get the most value out of their most valuable data, which is arguably their first party data.
Yeah. Well, Christian, that was a very good run through. I mean, you gave me a run through the ATS ecosystem a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, wow, that's pretty impressive. But it's great to see because like people kind of like fret about what Google and Facebook power they have, and Apple. But there are ways to innovate around that, particularly with your own sort of persistent data.
Exactly, and I think really what we're trying to do is like bring back control of data to the publishers, bring back control of their own data, not rely on any third parties to monetize their data. Don't rely on third party IDs or whatever to monetize your data, but create your own first party data graph that you can then connect into whatever other kind of downstream platforms that you want to.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that, Chris. That was great. And I'm sure we'll see you again on Trade Talk TV. And it was great to get run through ATS. And we'll hopefully, when this COVID nonsense ends, we'll get you in for a proper whiteboard session and then a couple of beers down the local bar.
Sounds awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you. And we'll see you next time, viewers, on Trade Talk TV. Thanks.